So I wasn't always bad at saying goodbye. There was a time it wasn't such a big deal. But there are two distinct portions to my childhood: ADD, BDD, and ADD. Before Dad died, after Dad died. On the before Dad died side of childhood, my memories are full of joy and empathy and enthusiasm. My parents owned an industrial and aerial photography business, and they were both pilots. And our house was filled with friends and family, lively conversation about politics, history, food. My dad's sister, our Aunt Charlotte, was a vital part of our family, and she helped and supported, and there was just this sense of love, and I knew how cherished my sister and I were. And my dad would drive us to school regularly, and he would listen to classical music as we drove, and I'd complain that the music had no words. And he'd say, "Kid, someday you'll appreciate this." And he was right. In the evenings, I remember my sister and I taking turns and climbing into his lap, and he would read to us, and he would draw pictures of race cars and airplanes with a precision of a draftsman, but the heart of an artist. He was a Renaissance man. He was a nurturer. My mother, not so much. But together, they were a yin and a yang. And they made a really lovely whole. On the last day of the BDD era, I woke to the sound of my dad's motorcycle. Of course, he rode a motorcycle. And I ran to the front door because he was supposed to drive me to school that day, and that was the wrong vehicle. And he was gone. My mom came out and said, "Get inside and have your cereal. I'm driving you to school." I was like, "But he didn't say goodbye." And she said, "It's fine. He went to get his flight physical, and he'll be home this afternoon." The flight physical was an annual thing. It was really the only thing that I recall them bickering about, was that he had to get it done, and she had to get it done, and she'd get hers done, and then he wouldn't get his done until the last minute because he didn't like hospitals and he didn't trust doctors, but he had to get his physical. And now, mind you, this man was a nationally known aerobatic pilot. Like, planes were our family's life. And so it was very important. So he was off to do that. Okay. But that day, he didn't come home. And the next day, my mom was at the hospital all day and after school. And my aunt was taking care of us, my dear Aunt Charlotte. And this wasn't unusual, but it felt unusual that day. And she made us dinner, and she sat with us, and she told us some stories, and we asked questions, and she let us worry, and we cried a little bit, and she snuggled us a little harder and got us into bed finally, and we went to sleep expecting to see our parents in the morning. And in the middle of the night, my sister, who was 6, sat up in bed screaming, "Daddy's dead! Daddy's dead!" And that woke everybody up. And Charlotte came in and talked to us, and "Don't worry, everything, it's okay. We'll talk about this in the morning." And she sang to us a bit and got us back asleep. Well, got my sister back to sleep. I didn't sleep very well. And about dawn, I was fully awakened by the phone ringing. And I snuck in around and listened to Aunt Charlotte pick up the phone, and she was speaking to my mother. And I heard her say, "Vicki, I can't do that for you. You have to tell the girls." And my heart sunk. And I went back to bed, fearing that my sister's yells in the night of Daddy's dead were prophetic. But I tried to ignore it, and I put that fear that my life had just completely changed deep into my stomach. And a few hours later, we were up. My mom returned from the hospital. She was dressed very nicely. Usually she was in jeans and a t-shirt and work clothes. But she was in her best heels and her suit. And she told us to come into her room. And we sat down on the bed, and she took off her heels and her earrings, and she sat between us. And I remember Charlotte standing in the doorway. And my mom, in her very direct way, said, "Girls, your father had a heart attack, and he's dead. So he won't be coming home." And we both started crying. And she said, "You can't, don't cry. Daddy wouldn't want you to cry. We need to move on. There's going to be a funeral in a few days, and I'm going to need y'all to be more help around the house." I noticed Charlotte wipe her eyes and walked into the living room. And that was the beginning of the after Daddy died era. The big hugs and the empathy and the letting us just feel our feelings wasn't part of our life anymore. Life was life now. And there were so many memories and so many foggy things around those next few days and months. But the most impactful thing was my dad's funeral. This was a couple days later. Now, mind you, this is 1983. There is no internet. But somehow, this small little funeral home was overflowing with people. And I remember vaguely hearing my mother say, "I didn't think I needed to get the big room." But here we were, and I felt hands squeezing my cheeks and my face smashed into scratchy suits of strangers, and it was all just so much. And my sister and myself and my cousin, who we were inseparable, we were ushered to the front row. And as we moved forward, I heard people in the audience, or in the crowd, the mourners, say, "Oh, those are Bob's kids. Oh, this is too bad. Oh, that poor woman. This is so soon." And we all sat down, and my mom stood at the front, this very simple black A-line dress, and she had, I remember, this beautiful black felt hat, and she was very stoic. I'm sure there was Valium involved. And she thanked everyone for being there. And she spoke about how my dad had such an impact on so many people's lives. And then she said that she really appreciated him for marrying her. And then she got down, and it was time for the procession, or the viewing of the casket. And I'd never been to a funeral before. I didn't know what was going on exactly, but we were ushered. My uncle kind of scooted us to the coffin, and we walked by. And my dad's eyes were open. And I was like, this doesn't seem right. But I'd never been to a funeral before. And my uncle pushed us a little quicker, and he kind of did something to the casket, and I heard him say, "Those incompetent bastards." So I knew there was something wrong. And years later, I remember asking my cousin, "What do you remember about my dad's funeral?" And she said, "I really only remember going by the casket and his eyes were open, and that was really creepy." It's like, okay, that happened. But what also happened was that in my child's mind, his bright blue eyes were looking at me. So maybe he wasn't really dead. And I hadn't said goodbye. So that must mean that there is a chance, there's some hope that he would come back. And so I continued that through my life. I was not going to say goodbye because somehow if you said that, that was final. But if you didn't say it, there was a chance they'd come back. I know the logic's totally flawed, but give me a break. I was 8 and I was in trauma. So this continued until my mid-30s when I was a newly single mother. And I wanted to ensure that my daughter would have a healthy dynamic in her relationship with me, and that she would understand empathy and be okay with grief and be able to process these things. So I did what you do. I went to therapy and I talked about my mother, and I talked about empathy, and we talked about grief. And through all of that untangling of my heart, I finally came to terms with the fact that goodbye is part of the cycle of life and relationships. And I realized that grief is the loss of the potential of love, whereas bereavement is a representation of that love that will always last. And so now, whenever someone leaves, I still don't really favor the words goodbye, but now I can hold those words and I can let the person that I know that I truly love them. And the last goodbye always has that love. Thank you.